Hi, big cup, and hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Gilmore Way podcast. Real quick before we get started today, I just wanted to highlight what I think would be a Lorelai approved Tumblr, which is true to form. Coffee is my love language. But I wanted to point this out because it was made and sent to me over the holidays by the same wonderful person who is responsible for our podcast logo, which you see on our thumbnail and in the upper right-hand corner of this screen. So I really quick wanted to shout out this creator. She's wonderful. She makes all of her own things. If you ever are interested in purchasing or just wanting a gift created for a loved one, she's willing to make anything from tumblers to apparel. We do include her contact information and her Instagram in the description below, so please go check her out. She's wonderful. Again, she can make anything that you want to. And right now, we just want to quickly acknowledge her and say thank you for the work she's done in helping us to make this podcast what it is up until now. So, bravo to you. Please go check her out. But that being said, our focus this week is going to be on young love in the show and first breakups. And we're going to be focusing again on the whole with that, but mainly episodes 16 and 17 of season 1. So we're going to dive into that, of course, with our quick recaps, and then we'll get into the topic of conversation.
Yeah, we're going to cover all the high school sweethearts and teen angst we can squeeze into an hour. So stay tuned for that. Strap in. And just a friendly reminder, please do all the YouTube-y things. Like, subscribe, share, find us on social media. It's fast, it's free, and it really helps us out. So, all right, let's get into it. Starting out with the recaps.
Yep. First off, we have Star-Crossed Lovers and Other Strangers. And we start off with this episode with the town's Firelight Festival, which puts everyone in a romantic mood. But given Lorelai's recent separation from Max, she's not really in the spirit. Dean takes Rory on a special date for their 3-month anniversary, but after presenting her with the car he's building for her and telling her he loves her, her inability to reciprocate his feelings eventually causes their breakup pretty quickly. Rachel arrives back in town to kick things back up with Luke, and a conversation with Emily about not having any 3-month anniversaries of her own in a long time encourages Lorelai to go back to Max and tell her that she's not over him.
All right, episode 17 is The Breakup, Part 2. Rory returns from her big date and tells Lorelai that Dean broke up with her. She refuses to wallow and goes into project mode, waking Lorelai up at 6 a.m. and dragging her around town while trying to avoid any place where she might run into Dean. The rest of the town finds out quickly, and Luke even tries to physically restrain Dean from entering the diner while Rory is there. In an effort to distract herself, Rory decides to go to a party Madeline is throwing with Lane. Lane meets a Korean boy she likes that her parents would actually approve of, and that horrifies her. Tristan fights with his girlfriend, and they break up, and when Rory goes to console him, they end up kissing. But Rory hasn't processed her feelings yet, and she ends up crying and is finally ready to wallow. So, this is an interesting batch of episodes. I quite enjoy these ones. I also find it funny and fitting that Star-Crossed Lovers and Other Strangers opens up with Miss Patty narrating sort of a story about 2 young lovers from different counties whose parents disapproved of their love and snuck out of their homes one night to travel through the dark to find each other, and their way was lit by stars. And their fated love story apparently inspired the entire origin story of the town. You know, this sort of Romeo and Juliet sort of story is very much like at the heart of the town mythology. The idea that the situation was true love has been so mythologized that they tell this story every year, and it gets the whole town in a nostalgic, romantic mood. And they actually throw a festival. Classic Stars Hollow decides to throw a festival to celebrate this old story. And so it really fits in with the way that we sort of focus on these stories of young love and high school sweethearts and the role that those relationships play in the Gilmore Girls' lives. You know, right from Lorelai and Christopher through Dean and Rory, through Paris and Jamie, and Lane and her love interests as well. So it's really interesting. And then we also have Mayor Porter's story at the end of Star-Crossed Lovers, about how he met his own true love at the Firelight Festival, and that they've been married for 43 years. which puts them as high school sweethearts who have probably never moved out of Stars Hollow. They've probably, they probably got married young, put down roots, and stuck around, and now he's the mayor of the town. So it's funny though, and she's playing bingo at Bridgeport that night.
Mm-hmm.
I found that really funny. Taylor's like, get her to wave, and he's like, I can't. She's at bingo in Bridgeport.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to all of it, but this town is just full of lovey-dovey moments, and a lot of the town events are even just perpetuated to kind of inspire that community, but also that kind of like love for one another as neighbors, but also just to kind of enforce and instill like a love for one another where they encourage romance blossoming because that's how the town was founded. That's what they perpetuate. So it's endearing to see. Sometimes it's a bit too nuanced and orchestrated, but I think that's what you're going to get from a small town vibe. On the whole, I really appreciate it. So it was nice to have that episode lead off with that story. I thought it was a perfect intro and segue into especially what we're going to be talking about this week.
Yeah, it kind of goes to prove how much we as a society tend to idolize first love and young love. I just, we're so taken with the idea of childhood or teenage sweethearts, high school sweethearts. There's so many examples I can think of shows that highlight that. You have one from my childhood was Corey and Topanga from Boy Meets World. And then you had Haley and Nathan in One Tree Hill. You had Serena and Dan and Chuck and Blair in Gossip Girl. Zach and Kelly from Saved by the Bell. And that's just a handful that I can name off the top of my head. I'm sure there were more out there that I haven't even listed, but it's so key to these sort of like teen dramas and teen comedies to sort of idealize this idea of falling in love in high school and then going ahead and getting married. But we really never see where those characters end up at the end of the day. So I thought it would be interesting to sort of look at it because Gilmore Girls ran long enough and she broke up with Dean early enough. Plus, we have the revival. So we can kind of track the trajectory of these relationships a little better than some other shows where we don't have that knowledge of what happens to these kids in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you make an excellent point with Boy Meets World. Corey and Topanga, I think, are even a more prime example, I'll say, than what we get in Gilmore Girls. Started off just being friends as elementary school kids, progressed into a relationship as teenagers, and it worked out for them in the show. That's not always the case, and that's not what we get in Gilmore Girls, but that is a really good example. It's a really good juxtaposition to Lorelai and Chris, which I think is a really good place for us to start here with this one. If we're going to be talking about first and teenage and young loves, because without them, we wouldn't have a show.
Exactly.
So
yeah, they really kind of kick it all off by, letting their teen passion sort of take over and getting knocked up at 16. And then everyone wants to try to force them to marry each other.
It's not problematic at all.
Sounds like a great idea, Young love
Yeah,
is it's so solid and so mature, and it's such a good idea to just hop into marriage with someone because they got you pregnant.
Yeah. And too, like Lorelai is definitely not mature or ready for that. And I think what's especially telling too is that I don't think Christopher was the first partner that she's ever had. Perhaps the first guy that she ever felt somewhat of like a love and affection for. But she had been very sexually active even before Christopher. Probably, I think we're not ever given like a timeline, but I think just what the show provides us with, she was probably sexually active from the time that she was 13 or 14. So by the time Christopher rolls around, she knows what she's doing, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I think Christopher is charismatic and an attractive, young man for her at that point in her life. And I think she does feel affection and care for him. But there's always something to be said too at that age where for teenagers experiencing their first loves, and we'll get into it with every relationship that we explore this week, your brain's not fully formed. You're not emotionally able to combat and process what's happening and what's going on and the feelings that you're feeling. So they were up against that right from the start, as is most teenage relationships, but it didn't help them. And getting pregnant, especially, complicated the situation further. But what do you think about how they reacted to the announcement of that pregnancy, what it was going to do for their relationship, and how they reacted to how their parents were responding to it as well?
Oh, yeah, it's an interesting one. That is one of my favorite episodes. Dear Emily and Richard just gut punches me every time I watch it, because you can see Christopher's resignation, and Lorelai is just like, no, absolutely not. Like, you're not going to derail your life because of this. You know, you're still going to go to Paris and sleep on that park bench.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I will figure this out. I do not want to get married. I don't want our parents to dictate our lives. So, yeah, they just let it fall apart after Rory was born, because Lorelai made the executive decision to run away to Stars Hollow and start over for herself. So, kind of a sad way for a relationship like that to end. And it's part of the reason, I think, that they never really got over each other.
Mm-hmm.
And they keep coming back to each other time and again. You can see it all throughout. You know, when he first comes to Stars Hollow in episode 15 of season 1 and proclaims his love and asks her to marry him, and she confronts him about still not being mature enough to really be a family man, that his, like, he really still does not have his shit fully together. And then almost a full season later, we have Emily dredging up the past in It Should Have Been Lorelai, when
Mm-hmm.
she confronts Lorelai about her role in potentially not helping Christopher mature by making him show up for Rory, which again is totally not fair to put on Lorelai. But even Emily is obsessed with the idea of the teenage sweethearts who had a baby ending up together, getting married, being a real family. And that doesn't make it right. She said that she thought they were meant to be together. And then Lorelai counters saying, you know, the timing never worked out for us. And if that's the case, then we were never really meant to be. And I think she's right about that. You know, you can't force a marriage to work. I think if they had gotten married, they would not have lasted. I mean, only 2% of people ever marry their high school sweethearts. And only about half of those marriages make it past 10 years in. So when you get married that young, your chances are not good to begin with. But when it's imposed upon you by your parents or by society or by anyone, it's going to put even more pressure and stress on that relationship. And it's really not going to do anyone any good to try to force that. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I find them a really interesting case study in this, because they are so connected throughout the years. And we even eventually see them get married and then quickly divorced. You know, Christopher brings it up when he sort of pitches the idea of getting married in France. And he says, you know, what if everything was to bring us here? And they reminisce about the Dear Emily and Richard moment, and they say that they would sleep on a park bench with each other, and you know, they sort of still act like they're 16, and like that time in their lives was the end all be all for them, and it took them a long time to get it together, and here they are now. It's fate, but it wasn't. So, I mean, what do you think? Do you
No,
think they were meant to be? Should they have gotten married?
no, I don't think they ever should have. Getting married for the sake of letting a child have a mother and a father be in a joint relationship like that, um, is noteworthy, but especially at the age that they're at, just incredibly problematic, and just not, it's a band-aid to the solution. These two young people still have their whole lives ahead of them. They still have career aspirations for themselves, but also career aspirations that are being placed upon them. And I think it's really good that in the flashbacks that we get, that young Lorelai is, saying like, listen, I'll do this alone if I have to. Like, don't alter your life or, take yourself off the train track that you're on or the path that you're on for the sake of this. You know, live your life still the way that you need to. She recognizes that they're still so young that this shouldn't alter their trajectories in that way. And I think that was a really mature response from her, especially considering that the age that she's at. So, no, I don't think they should have ever gotten married as teenagers. Thankfully, they didn't. But in general, I don't think they were ever the right ones for each other on the whole. Emily tries to force it. She tries to orchestrate it. She even gives Lorelai advice on marriage and how difficult it can be. But Lorelai knows in the back of her head, I think, that Christopher is not the one for her. And she wants to want him. And that's I think the key point there. But wanting to want somebody and making that the right person for you are two very different things. And Christopher never was that, which is why I think that relationship never worked out, why Max never worked out, why Jason never worked out, why all of the partners that she had never worked out, because in the back of her mind, she was always trying to fill a space, but with the wrong men.
Yeah, she says it to Christopher in It Should Have Been Lorelai. I always held on to this idea of us, and you were finding yourself and getting your life together. And I always, maybe held myself back from other relationships, including with Max, kind of hoping that we could be a thing. And then they have a huge fight about this because it puts too much pressure on him to feel responsible for the breakdown of some of her other relationships. And he's right about that. But yeah, I think in the end he was wrong skipping forward to season 7 when he says, we're meant to be together. Because I mean, maybe it's just the hindsight of having seen the whole show. But we know that they're not actually meant for each other. And in a way, I almost think that the marriage in their 30s was somewhat necessary for them to finally be like, hey, we gave this a shot and we figured out that it's the wrong thing. So now we can really, truly put this behind us. But definitely getting married at 16 would have been a bad idea. I think it's illegal. Like, don't you have to be 18 to get married anyway?
Nope. I mean, I don't know how things are. Maybe that's the law in Canada, but in the United States, it's really state dependent. It's not a federal thing. It's a state jurisdictional thing. So depending on what state you're living in, I think even up until recently, and some states may still allow it, which is horrifying, but they will issue marriage licenses and allow people to be married at the age of 14.
Ugh. Lord. Like, no. Ew, no. Hard pass. I don't even know how to recover from that information. But anyway, yeah, it would have been bad if they had been, like, if they had gone through with it and gotten married in their teens. I feel like getting married in their 30s had a higher chance of success because, as you said earlier, at least they had finished maturing. Their brains had developed, they had been out into the world, they had opportunities for experiences and maturation. And the fact that they tried it in their 30s and still failed proves that they were never really meant to be together. So I'm glad that they finally called it quits and were able to move on from that in a fairly civil way.
Yeah, and hopefully at the end of the day, it just allows the both of them to actually meet someone and fall in love with someone who is the right person for them.
Yeah.
I
We know
think we
how
get
that
that
turns
with
out.
we do. If you haven't caught on based on what we already said, you should. But if not, just go watch the show and you'll figure it out for yourself.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really good end spot for those two because I really want us to focus the majority of our time this week on Rory's first boyfriend and relationship, which is with Dean, and how that unfolds, how it eventually, spoiler, ends, and just the effects of their breakup and their first relationship, but also what she learns from it and what she gains from it going forward. So let's jump to them.
Yeah. So obviously we've already had a conversation about their anniversary that happens in this episode, and some other aspects of their relationship, especially sort of as it parallels to Lorelai and Max. And in a few weeks, well, maybe like 2 months ish from now, we've got Battle of the Boyfriends coming up. So at that point, we're going to talk about more minute detail as to their compatibility. But for this conversation, what I really want to like talk about is like what makes Dean a good first boyfriend and what makes Dean a bad first boyfriend. Any thoughts?
Mm-hmm. You want to start with? I mean, I guess we'll start with the good.
Yeah. So, give me something good about Dean because I'm struggling.
Takes an interest in wanting to find out what Rory likes and like just I don't know, just not making it his own interests, but he sees what she cares about, and where her interests and her hobbies lie, and he kind of invests time in getting to make that his own and know that a little bit better. I think first, like, just I'll go to books. Like, he knows that Rory is a very avid reader, and he takes time to listen to her book suggestions and read the things that she is recommending. Even though she recommends a lot of like just Russian, romantic English authors that maybe are a little bit above and beyond what he can process for himself and not necessarily where his interests lie, but he's willing to read the books that she suggests and then converse with her about them. And I think within the context of any relationship, that's a really cool thing to just find out what your partner is interested in and take the time to explore that a little bit better for yourself so that you can at least talk about it, even if it's not something at the end of the day that is your interest or super important to you, but it just is taking time to get to know and appreciate some of the things that your partner loves. And I saw that from Dean pretty much right off the bat.
Yeah, I will applaud him for at least giving it a shot. But I think teenagers hardly know themselves well enough as teens to understand that they might be spending too much time doing things that they think they're interested in service of maintaining a relationship, but that once they actually get to know themselves better, they're going to feel maybe like they wasted some time on it. I think, yeah, you hardly know who you are when you're a teenager, and you change a lot over the years. And so knowing yourself is a very important part of entering into any relationship, no matter what age you're at. So good on Dean for reading Anna Karenina and giving Tolstoy a second try when he says that he thinks it's over his head.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you see how it worked out for them in terms of he didn't seem to continue to read after they broke up. And even when they get back together in season 5 and she asks him about her article that she wrote on the Life and Death Brigade, he can't really keep up with her. Like, he can't converse with her about her passion on the level she needs him to. And it's juxtaposed with Logan. So, yeah, it's still a good thing. It's still good that he spent the time indulging in her hobbies. So, point for Dean, still well done. I guess a second point for Dean is that he was very loyal, at least to Rory. Not so much maybe later to Lindsay, but while he was with Rory, he was always there for her and didn't have a wandering eye again until Lindsay, and it wandered back to Rory. He just, he always showed up for her, and he devoted himself to her entirely throughout the course of their relationship in a way that she didn't reciprocate.
No, she most certainly did not. But I will, yes, that is another tick mark on the positive for Dean's side. he never faltered in how much he cared about her. He never sought out other people, again, at least in the early on seasons when they were first dating. He was loyal and he was faithful, and he had his flaws, and we'll talk more about them in Battle of the Boyfriends, but he was a pretty unwaveringly loyal boyfriend for her to have from the get-go. And Lorelai recognizes it. And I think that's also really telling too, where your mother at the end of the day was just like, you got really lucky with having an amazing first boyfriend. Not everybody gets that.
Mhm.
So while it didn't work out for them in the long run, and while again Dean is still problematic in a lot of ways, I concur with Lorelai's sentiment that he was a really good first boyfriend for her.
Yeah. And speaking of Lorelai, another thing I really like about Dean is that he managed to have sort of a relationship with Lorelai on his own. He was
Mm-hmm.
able to have something of a friendship with her outside of his relationship with Rory that allowed for a mutual respect and understanding and trust between them as well, which I think is important for first relationships sometimes, especially when the mother and daughter are so close and are almost more of friends than mother and daughter. Having a certain ability to relate to Lorelai probably helped him out with Rory. And he even went to her for advice when their relationship was struggling, like after Jess outbid him for the basket and when Rory was sort of ghosting him a little
Mm-hmm.
and not wanting to hang out as much. He definitely leaned on Lorelai in that moment, and I think it really helped out their relationship because she was able to give him really good advice to just back off a little and give her some space because that's, she needs to be able to do her own thing, and he was just too inexperienced to know that yet. He was just very excited and wanted to spend as much time with her as he could, which is sweet, but not always the best thing for the relationship. So I
Mm-hmm.
really enjoyed seeing their dynamic because it's not really anything you see.
Mm-hmm. But something that you just said leads me into one of the first negative checkpoints that I would give Dean, which is you say that he wants to spend a lot of time with her and be around her, and that's great and that's wonderful. Um, but there's a line to be drawn there, and there are boundaries that I think also need to be put into place. And one of the things that I will fault Dean for is, in the most generalistic way I can put it, I think he was way too possessive and demanding of Rory's time.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
There are
we
multiple
see
instances of it.
there, oh, so many. One of the first that comes to the forefront is just when she needs to do community service to get some extracurriculars on her resume for Harvard. And he can't understand why she needs to devote a day for working for Habitat for Humanity when he just wants her to spend it with him. Um, Another one that comes to the forefront is just when he calls her one day and says like, "Oh, let's hang out," or "What are you doing tonight?" And she says, "Oh, I think I just kind of want to hermit myself away tonight and have a night to myself." But hours later, he's calling her and says like, "Oh, I'm on my way over." She made it pretty clear that she wanted to have a night to herself, and you're instantly disrespecting that to go spend time with her. And those are not even the only two, but just on the whole, I think that he wanted sometimes her worldview to be him and wanted her free time to be spent with him and couldn't understand or wasn't willing to understand that she needs and should have other friends and other interests and time to herself as well. And it can't be all about you. And Dean was not good at processing that concept ever, I think.
Yeah. The other example that comes to mind is in Runaway Little Boy when the class group for Shakespeare comes to Stars
Mm,
Hollow to rehearse at Miss Pally's, and he insists on coming so that he can basically have a stare down with Tristan because he's feeling possessive and jealous and anxious about Tristan being around Rory. So it kind of happens again in the episode that you were talking about when Paris and Jess show up and he flips out when he finds out that she wasn't in fact alone, which, I kind of understand it. But just two instances fairly close together of him just inserting himself over her objections. You know, she was like, Dean, I don't think it's a good idea for you to come to my rehearsal because it's going to take us longer to get through it if you're just standing there staring at us. And he insists on it. And then again, he insists on coming over with ice cream when she wants to be studying and spending a night alone because she never gets time alone. So, yes. So that's clearly in the con column for Dean. Another one I can think of is just how aggressive he can be at times. The first time we really see it is in the dance episode when he threatens Tristan, and, you know, he freaks out after the car accident. He threatens Jess after the breakup, and there's just a number of instances where his anger gets the better of him. Luckily, he never takes it out on Rory physically, but you can definitely tell that she is kind of intimidated by him, and she really just wants to keep the peace because she notices this sort of streak that he can get of like borderline violence and aggression.
Yeah. It may have happened more than twice, but I can only think of two moments off the top of my head, but where she says the exact same line of please don't be mad. And she says it first to Dean when he tells her that he loves her and she can't reciprocate. And so he instantly just starts getting heated, like, well, why can't you? Like, what's wrong? I've done all of these great things for you tonight. I bought you dinner. I've showed you that I'm making this car for you, and you can't reciprocate those feelings. And she says, well, please don't be mad.
Yeah.
And then she says it.
And he says, it's either something you feel or you don't, which is also wrong.
Yeah. But she says those same words again in a later episode when, you know, she just wants to have time for herself, and but also when she needs to rehearse for the Romeo and Juliet thing at school, and he realizes that, like you said, Tristan is going to be there, and he can't, his jealousy and his insecurity is kicking in, and he wants to attend every rehearsal, and he can't just trust her and trust your girlfriend enough to know that, like, she's not going to do anything. It is literally just a school assignment. And she notices that again he's getting upset, and she says, please don't be mad. And that's very telling and a red flag for me, where if on multiple instances you need to go to your boyfriend or your significant other and just say, you know, you need to talk them off that ledge and say, like, I see you're getting emotionally built up, let me try and scale you back. But the fact that she has to say it twice, at least, she might have said it again, I can't recall, but those are
she
two
says
very...
that to other people too. Like,
Yeah.
it's something that goes to her avoidant nature. She just cannot handle conflict, and so she always just has to sort of like say something like that and invalidate other people's feelings and be like, please don't be mad.
Yeah, but especially with Dean, she was doing it because she noticed that he was getting emotionally overwhelmed and upset, and needed, and potentially needed to talk him off a ledge before he got violent or, you know, let his emotions get the better of him. And if you're noticing that in a partner, you need to address that, because that's really problematic and dangerous behavior that could, if left unchecked, lead to something even worse. And it does. I mean, it's not all Dean's fault, but, you know, he does end up getting physical with Jess at a party and getting into a fight. So yeah, there's aggression and there's anger there that is not okay, to put it bluntly.
Yeah. And speaking of him getting in a fight with Jess later, it's almost still like being possessive over Rory, even though they've broken up and he's with someone else and she's with someone else, because that was a very boyfriendy thing to do, to stand up and white knight for your ex. So he sort of never quite lets go of that idea that, you know, they were each other's first, kind of. So
yeah, but she does that too. I mean,
yeah,
you know, when she ends up sleeping with him after, you know, as a married man, when he's with Lindsay, you know, her whole sentiment is like, oh, well, no, you were mine first. Like, they're both possessive of each other in a way that is largely unhealthy and not okay. I don't care how long you've been with someone. I don't care how long your relationship has gone on. I don't care how long you've been married. Like, you need to recognize the individuality of the person that you're with and not claim them as property or say they're your own. Like, and it doesn't mean that you don't love them or care about them, but you're just recognizing their autonomy and not being possessive over them in that very unhealthy and toxic way. And Lorelai and well, not Lorelai, but Rory and Dean were both just always very unable to do that with each other,
Yeah.
but with other partners as well. And it never was okay.
Yeah. So on the whole, he was a pretty solid first boyfriend, I think. He was generally pretty nice to her. He was devoted. He spent lots of time with her. He worked to understand her and be a part of her life. He wasn't ghosting on her all the time. I think he really taught her um, what she deserved from men in a lot of ways, in terms of
Mm-hmm.
attentiveness and communication and presence in her life. Because we see it later when Jess neglects to call her and she ends up staying home on a Friday night and her mom makes her go out to the hockey game, that she deserves someone who's gonna, even if they can't be there all the time, at least communicate with her that they're sorry but they have to work.
Mm-hmm.
It just is what it is. So she even sort of gets wistful about it in the revival when she runs into him at Dosie's and says, you taught me what safe feels like, because she never really had to question his feelings for her. So I think that was good for her and set some foundations for later relationships. And also, when they break up for the first time after he says, I love you, that experience shapes her going forward with Logan as well. When she decides to say it to him, her presentation of that is so much more mature than his. And she also says, you don't have to say it back. Someone sprung that on me one time and it really threw me for a loop. So don't feel pressure to reciprocate immediately if you're not on the same level that I am. And so that was a big thing that she definitely took away from that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But
That's
obviously,
yeah.
I go ahead. I was
No,
going
I
to
was about to
transition
say.
us to something else. So finish up
Uh,
if you got something.
no, I was about to say I want to move us on to something similar as well. I don't know if you had the same transitional point, but I want to talk about just very quickly the fallout of the breakup and how Rory processed it. Is it a good tactic to be diversionary to wanting to address your emotional feel like what you're feeling after a breakup? And Rory does that with wanting to seek out distractions and things that she can do to not have to think about the fallout of what has just occurred. Or do you think it's good to wallow, as Lorelai encourages her to do, and just immediately confront that? What do you think is the most like I guess like the healthiest of measures in terms of how to process like a first breakup like that?
I think Lorelai was on the right track in suggesting wallowing, because if you don't confront your feelings and do it early on in the process of grieving a relationship, they're just going to build up and burst out at some other point, which is exactly what we see happen in P.S. I La, when she sees that Lane and Dean are paired for a science project and she walks in on them, and like nobody can tell her anything about Dean. Like they're just walking on eggshells to protect her feelings because she's still avoiding dealing with them and she can't face Dean because she hasn't worked through her feelings. And when I say that Lorelai's on the right track with it, she's right, but I think she also might have been able to explain it a little better, in terms of the suggestion sounded bad. Like the word wallowing to me maybe has a bit of a negative connotation, in that
Hmm.
it sounds like steeping in your feelings and just being kind of pathetic. And Rory says she doesn't want to be one of those girls who falls apart because she doesn't have a boyfriend. And that's sort of the idea she's getting from the way Lorelai is pitching this to her. She thinks it means that she needs to just be sad and do it only because she doesn't have a boyfriend anymore. But Lorelai sort of fails to point out the most important part of it, which is it's not about whether or not you have a boyfriend. It's about grieving the loss of something that was really important to you, something that you care deeply about. That's the rationale. That's the process you have to go through during a breakup at any age. And she didn't understand that. All she wanted to do was jump into action to change her environment by throwing out everything that he ever looked at or touched or complimented, you know. Colonel Clucker, really?
Oh, rip.
Poor Colonel Clucker. I think he's still around. He's fine.
He's still,
I think
like, he's okay, but yeah.
They just put him in storage for a while. He's okay. But, you know, and then she makes the to-do list and feng shui's the furniture to, like, get out that pent-up anxious energy at 5 a.m. or whatever it was that she was doing that. So it's a necessary port. It's a necessary part of the mourning process to confront your feelings and to let yourself be sad, because if you don't, it will just come up in an ugly way. But it's not the only part of the process, and you don't want to do it for too long. And it is good to distract yourself with something that brings you joy and pleasure, which, you know, spending time with Lane is a good thing that she does. She goes out to that party. She gets through a to-do list of productive things. Rory likes productivity. It's something that makes her feel good and fulfilled. And so those are good things to do, but you need to, you can't skip too many steps. If you try to blow past the part where you marinate in your feelings a little bit, you're never going to actually get through it. You might be able to avoid it for a while, but it will always creep back up, and it will always have a lasting impact on you if you don't do that work.
Yeah, I agree. I think there needs to be a balance between addressing those feelings and wanting to move on from it and come back to the things that you've loved and that you've always appreciated and the hobbies that you've had outside of that person. Rory tries. I think she does it semi well, but again, Lorelai she's never had guidance from her mother in terms of how to move on from a relationship that flounders. And there are instances of Lorelai just telling her, I don't know what I'm doing, so how can I guide you? So she kind of has to figure it out by herself. But on the whole, agreed. I think there always needs to be a balance between coming back to the things that you love and rediscovering who you are and like learning to re-love yourself in that way so that you can then learn to love someone else again down the line. But just also not being immediately dismissive of all of those feelings. So balance is key.
Yeah, we see that when Lorelai goes to confront Max in the Breakup Part 2 episode, where she says, you know, I didn't wallow and I didn't get over you. So a bit of a different situation, but kind of same. Like Rory was following the modeling that Lorelai was giving her. So, question: what, if anything? Sorry, I'm getting Elaine flashbacks from the Depp v. Heard trial. If you know, you know. What, if anything, did Rory learn from her first relationship and her first breakup? And like, how does that transfer to sort of like her second breakup from Dean, which is still her first like breakup? The first time is really just sort of a hiatus that is born out of them miscommunicating and having different ideas about where they're at in the relationship. But then in season 3, like Dean ends it and Rory jumps right into a relationship with Jess. So like, what did Rory learn from that first experience? And like, how does it translate as she moves into like the next phase of her dating life with her second boyfriend? And, you know, that sort of like bad boy, going from the good guy to the bad boy, if you will.
I want to say first and foremost that I think one of the biggest things that Dean taught her is just how to be treated and what's right and what's not, and the time and attention that you should be given. And I'll go back to saying that Dean was a bit too possessive of her time, but even aside from that, he paid her the mind and gave her the attention and the time of day that she was due. And she was really lucky to have that in a first boyfriend. Jess faltered in that way. And Jess was sort of in his own bubble a lot of the time with not caring about school, just wanting to work as many hours as possible. He puts in the work to, I hate to put it this way, but I have to. He puts in the work to like seal the deal with Rory and like, bag her and get her, as the girlfriend. But once he has her, he stops putting in the work. And it can't be that way. Like, you've got the girl, now you need to keep the girl. So that effort needs to be consistent and it needs to be maintained. And Jess didn't do that well. He doesn't call her when he says that he's going to. Lorelai calls him out on that, as she rightly should. And Lorelai even tells Rory, he said he was going to call you. He didn't call you. That's not okay. You can't be dependent on what he says he's going to do if he's not going to do it, and just be basing your schedule and your life around that. That's not acceptable behavior. So go out and do your own thing if that's how this man is going to be treating you. But Dean never did that. So I think that was a really good lesson and pickup that she got from Dean, that she didn't always right away recognize with Jess that, like, okay, I don't deserve to be treated this way. She gave him a lot of passes when she shouldn't. But I think that was a really good foundational thing that she gained with that first boyfriend, that maybe she didn't put into practice as much with Jess as she should have, but she did start to slowly learn how she should be treated and what's acceptable behavior and what's not.
Yeah. And I think I have one last point that jumps out at me about Rory sort of entering into her next relationship. And that's her desire to maintain a friendship with Dean after their breakup. And, they have that little, not a date, obviously, but, they go for pie and coffee at Weston's, and he tells her about his plans for college, and they sort of decide that they don't have to be mad at each other and that they can try to be friends because they really did care about each other and they want to maintain the friendship, even though the romantic part of the relationship is gone now. So Jess takes exception to that when he finds out that they've been seeing each other and she didn't tell him right away. So, I think she was well within her rights to maintain a relationship with Dean, and that she didn't owe Jess necessarily any apologies for that. But how do you feel about the way that she went about it and the fact that, she didn't really give Jess the courtesy of giving him a heads up that she wanted to spend time with Dean still?
I'm going to flag Rory for this one. She should have. I think it would have just been common courtesy to say, listen, I'm in a relationship with you now, and I'm going to be dedicated to this relationship, but this person is still an important part of my life, and I would like to pursue having a friendship with them. And I think for anyone who is on the receiving end of that, if you're being confronted with that transparency from your partner, with them having those desires and those wishes, it's good first and foremost that they're trusting and comfortable enough to come to you with that. And then I think you need to reciprocate it with saying, like, if you're comfortable telling me this, I'm going to trust you enough to, like, yes, if you want to pursue a friendship with them, thank you for being transparent about it. Go pursue a friendship. I'm going to trust you enough because you trusted me enough to come to me about it. So I would have really liked Rory to see, I would have liked her to see, like, just her go to Jess and just be like, yeah, I still want to maintain a friendship with Dean. So I didn't love that she hid it initially and was a little bit shady about still having interactions with Dean. And therefore I can understand Jess's response of just being, why are you still talking to him? What's going on there? Do you still care? And that could have been avoided if she had just had that conversation and been communicative with him in that way, but she wasn't. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think Communication is somewhere that Rory consistently fails. Granted, she was 17, we can't necessarily fault these kids sometimes for the gaffes they make in their relationships. It's easy in our 20s and 30s to watch the show and be like, oh my God, that was so dumb.
Yeah.
Like from our perches of experience and forget how old these kids are and like the fact that this is really the first time that they're feeling these things. And it's hard enough to manage this kind of stuff in relationships as a more mature adult. So when you lack the experience, it's going to be even worse and harder to navigate these delicate balances and situations. So, I remember how dumb I was at 17. So, I wish I had known about better communication back then. And I wish Rory had too, because she kind of messed up on that one. Not the biggest deal. But yeah, she should have at least come to Jess and been like, just so you know, this is a small town and we're going to end up seeing each other and we still want to maintain a friendship. So please trust me.
Yeah.
Okay. And on that note,
Agreed.
I would like to transfer us to Lane and her early interests in guys. And she makes some serious bad decisions pretty
Oh
early
boy,
on.
does she.
Oh boy, Rich Blumenfeld and Todd are just, two major misses for her. But in these episodes, we have her meeting Henry Cho, who I quite like. I almost wish they brought him back after Dave left the show because Henry was a quality dude.
Very stand-up guy. I liked him too.
Very stand-up guy. And, Lane freaks out because he's someone that her parents would actually approve of, and it horrifies her. So, what do you think of the fact that, she was so like uncomfortable with the idea of dating someone that her parents would actually approve of? Like, what does that say about her that she would turn down a guy who was great, who is actually interesting, and that her family could get on board with? Like, what is this reverse psychology going on there?
I'll say, first and foremost, Lane, taking a page out of Lorelai's book. Like, because that is exactly something that Lorelai would do.
And she does it with Jason.
Yes, she does. Very good pickup too. Yeah, like Lorelai will date a man, but if it's just like, oh, my mother loves him, my parents love him. Actually, I don't know. Like, and that's Lorelai, but like Lane does the same thing. And I have to question, like, why are you so concerned about dating somebody that your parents are going to love? Because that's kind of always what you're worried about. You're always worried about your mother's approval. And she's setting you up and putting you on these blind dates with random individuals that you genuinely don't have a care for. Now that you have met Henry, and she says herself, like he wants to be a pediatrician. His parents are involved in a local church and they're religious. Like, I'm falling for someone my mother would approve of. And Rory calls her out on it perfectly. And she's like, well, I'm failing to see the problem here. And Rory's right. Like, there isn't one. What's the issue? But I think it just goes to, especially in Lane's case, like, she just doesn't have a good relationship enough with her mother in that way where she is ever going to feel comfortable coming to her about a boy, even if it's a good one that her mom is going to like. And we see that when eventually there's a fallout between Lane and Henry, and she's communicating with Mrs. Kim about it. And Mrs. Kim is just like, well, see, this is why I tell you never to get involved with boys. What was his name anyway? And she's like, well, Henry Cho. And she's just like, wait, he was Korean? Oh no. Like, maybe I can call his parents. Maybe we can get him on the phone. Let's try and rectify this. But yeah, I just, that's where, like, I wish Lane had a better and healthier relationship with Mrs. Kim, where she doesn't have to worry about, like, who you're developing an attraction for, whether or not your mother is going to like them or not. Like, you're going to fall in love with whomever you fall in love with. And at the end of the day, that needs to be an like an autonomous thing that shouldn't be dependent on what anybody else in your life thinks.
Yeah, I feel like Mrs. Kim had a very interesting impact on Lane by being so strict with the boys that she could date in her teens, because she assumes that all American boys don't live up to her values. And I think that's an unfair assumption to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously we see Dave come in later and she actually approves of him. She finds that he sort of aligns with her ideals in a lot of way, in terms of, you know, he doesn't watch a ton of TV, he doesn't play violent video games, he hardly drinks soda because the bubbles freak him out. Best rant ever in the show
Mm-hmm.
is Dave's little trying to get Mrs. Kim to approve rant. And
Yep.
yeah, I think she's just too distrustful of both Lane and boys in general. And she puts all this anxiety onto the situation. And it doesn't allow Lane to learn to listen to her own instincts about things. And she, like, you see it later when she's with Zach and he wants to take the next step, shall we say. And she's like, my mom still lives in my head. You still live in my head. It's just always the voice of Mrs. Kim instead of the voice of Lane and what Lane wants.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the other thing that I think it does to her is it makes her the word that comes to mind is delusional. It sort of, it heightens her her expectations about certain things. So I think most teenagers are a little, quote unquote, delusional about relationships and about guys and, you know, about crushes and how significant or important these people are to you and to your life on the whole. And so it's part of why she goes so hard on Rich and goes too far and runs her fingers through his hair. And it's why she thinks Todd is her soulmate, even though they have nothing in common and she knows nothing about him.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it
Mm-hmm.
sort of intensifies her ideas about people who are not good for her, simply because it's a way to rebel against her mom, because it's everything that her mom doesn't want.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think,
you know,
inevitably
we've all
too,
done that.
Yeah.
We've all been there, and we've all been stupid and had bad crushes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those people who have such strict parents who are always trying to insert themselves and dictate things go even further in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I agree. And unfortunately, I think it impacts Lane's relationships going forward, where, you know, she ends up getting married, having twin boys right off the bat. I don't know if that was even ever the right person or life path for her. And I don't think it was. But I think she just fell into it because it was there, it was present, it was something that her mom was on board with. And so she kind of settled. And I really hated that for her. And I wish that she hadn't, because I feel like Lane had so much more just like jubilation and energy and life to live. And
Potential.
we never got that from her. And that's sad, but
we'll do a whole Lane character deep dive at some point where we'll touch on that more. But yes,
yeah,
it's true. I mean, it's just, we're only starting to see her relationships unfold in season 1. And those of us who have seen everything know how it goes for her. And Mrs. Kim is at the root of a lot of it. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
But
one more person that I want to bring up with while we still have time in terms of first loves and first relationships is Paris.
Yeah, she's an interesting one.
Yeah. What do you think about her first foray into the dating life, considering that it happens somewhat late for her? She doesn't really get a first boyfriend until she's 18. But what do you think about her first dive into the dating pool and relationships and how she approaches it, and what we see with her and just everything in the fallout as well, and how she broaches all of that?
Yeah, in the third Lorelei, we have her finally getting a date with Tristan, thanks to Rory, which is like really her first date. And she's had a crush on this kid since elementary school. So this is a big deal for her, and she freaks out. And Rory is there for her, despite the fact that they're not the greatest of friends yet. And they're kind of competitive still over the fact that Tristan seems to have feelings for Rory. But yeah, it's funny to watch her get ready for her first date because she makes cue cards of topics in case the conversation lulls, including the Spanish Inquisition. Like, who talks about the Inquisition on a first date? I don't know. It's Paris Geller.
Paris.
Paris. And obviously that doesn't go well for her. You know, Tristan just wants to remain friends after that. So it's sad that she doesn't get it. I don't know that Tristan would have been a great match for her long run. So I'm glad he went and did Dawson's Creek, but and that they didn't go on any more dates. But I guess that brings us to Jamie, who really is her first boyfriend. And he's a much better match for her. He meets her at her level intellectually, and he seems to appreciate and respect her ruthlessness and her ambition. You know, the fact that they make excellent debate partners was a good sign for them. So their relationship was really sweet to see. Again, she was freaking out before their first date, you know, thinking that he wasn't even going to check the Zagat guide. But once again, Rory talks her off a ledge and gives her some advice and tells her that if it doesn't work out, she can get some cats. So
that's sage advice.
Yeah, it's a cute relationship to watch unfold. We don't get to see a ton of Jamie, but you know, she does come back from Christmas and tell the story of him saying he loves her and all that. So I'm glad that she also seems to have had a great first boyfriend, and they date for at least a year, maybe a little bit more, before Ahhhh comes onto the scene. How do you feel about the end of the relationship with Paris and Jamie and how Ahhhh features into that?
I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Paris was an asshole.
Yeah.
She really did not treat Jamie well with how that ended. If you are discovering and developing feelings for another person in your life, that's fine. You need to be transparent and communicative with the person that you're with about that. And at least in my opinion, give them that closure and end it with them before you move on, especially if that person is expecting loyalty and that sort of devotion from you, which I think that Jamie was. So for her to just move on to Ahhhh and just shut the door on Jamie in the way that she did was not okay. I don't condone it at all. And I think that she was getting with Ahhhh for not even reasons that, like, I mean, you know, the whole dating a professor, dating a teacher thing, there's the whole argument that could be made that you're just trying to get a leg up and secure yourself a good grade. I don't even think that she was doing that because she's smart enough to know that she can get the grades that she needs to and that she wants to without it. But I think that Ahhhh, as a very older man at that point in her life, was potentially giving her just emotional fulfillment and meeting her even more so than Jamie did on an intellectual level in a way that she had never encountered in her life. And I think that also stemmed from the fact that she had never really had a good home life or been on the receiving end of any sort of love from her family. So I think she was finding a lot of fulfillment from Ahhhh that perhaps even Jamie couldn't give to her. But it doesn't mean that you do to Jamie what she did. So
yeah,
I have to just shame. I have to shame Paris here. I think her behavior was reprehensible, and she needs to be called out on it. And Jamie never deserved what he got from her.
Yeah. Can you say daddy issues?
Yes, I can. Daddy issues.
Yeah. Yeah. And not only was it just utterly awful for Jamie, but she also dragged Rory and Lane through it. She used Lane as a scapegoat, saying that she was Nancy Spongening it in their dorm room and that they were all trying to be there for her as she comes down off drugs. And, you know, Rory is the one who has to, you know, lie to Jamie, knowing that Paris is having an affair with an older man, but that she doesn't feel like it's her place to tell Jamie. That has to be Paris. And she tries to convince Paris to end it. And then when she does, it's just so cold and callous and gives him no closure, no information, nothing. And she never has to face any consequences for that. She never has a come to Jesus moment where she seems to feel any guilt, remorse, or anything after treating Jamie like a disposable piece of trash.
Mm-hmm. I concur. I could not say that better myself. But I want to start closing us out with this. What is, I think, the number one takeaway that not only Rory, Lane, Paris, Lorelai, but anyone needs to have from a first love and a first relationship and a first breakup? What do you think is the most singular and or important thing that we need to be taking away from a first love like that, and how that takeaway helps us going forward?
That's a really good question. I think we're not maybe teaching our kids enough about relationships. It's always kind of a taboo topic, and kids don't necessarily want to talk to their parents about their relationships because it's so new and so intense, and they don't know how to broach that subject. And so we don't maybe get the emotional education we need sometimes from people who have been there before us. And maybe that's why we turn to television, to learn from other people's relationships in the first place. And, I'm watching this from my 20s and 30s, so it didn't really help me at the time to gain any perspective on relationships or breakups. But thinking about that question as it pertains to this show, I think the biggest takeaway is that young love is immature. And it can be fun. It can be great. Some people can end up with their high school sweethearts. I know several people who married their sweethearts both straight out of high school and much later in life. It's definitely possible for people to reconnect and to have a fulfilling relationship down the line once they've had more experience. But we just have to sort of remember that the intensity won't always last, and that we still have a lot to experience. Like, if you're young and you're watching this, there's still a lot out there. And if you're going through a breakup, you just have to remember that you just have to keep getting to know yourself, and you need to continue to love yourself, and that there will be someone out there who compliments you perfectly. And there's absolutely no rush to get into a relationship or to get married or any of that. You should, kind of wait until you've gotten out into the world a little bit, and that will help you meet your match, because you'll be a lot more sure of yourself and sure of what you need and want out of a relationship. So we don't really see that understanding in some of these young relationships. I don't think you see it in any young relationship on television ever. It's really rare to get that piece of advice, I think. Maybe I'm wrong. It's been a while since I've revisited all the teen shows.
I mean, I'll go back to, I think Corey and Topanga come the closest. And they had their problems too, but I think at the end of the day, from an early age, they were always able to recognize what they loved about themselves, and therefore able to learn to love and appreciate the other person as well.
Yeah.
Not perfect, but a standout example. And they worked. They got married at 18, and it lasted. Doesn't always happen, but I think that's the only real instance that comes to mind to me that's just a shining example of it worked out well enough for them, if not beautifully. So,
but it's also important to remember that, it sounds bad and cynical and sad, but the odds are not good when you're that young.
Not.
So, don't rush into it, and don't cling to your first love. There's an intensity that comes with it being your first, and, your hormones are raging, and it just makes everything feel so much more intense. So just, take a step back and remember that there's no timeline. There's no rush. There's no reason to be like Dean and to insist upon marrying your third girlfriend just after you've graduated high school. There's no need for it. Grow together, live together, learn together. And if it doesn't work out, it's not because you don't love each other, but it's because you know enough about yourselves to know that you need to find someone who's truly compatible with you on every level. You know, your lifestyle needs to be compatible. You need to have chemistry. You need to have that emotional connection. All the parts need to be there. And if something's missing from your high school relationship, that's totally normal. And like, it's not the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is some wonderful and near perfect introspection. And again, just anyone who's listening, whether you're a teenager, whether you're in your 20s or 30s, I think it's just sage advice. Love yourself first, know what you love about yourself, and that will just always allow you to love another person better. So yeah, I don't even have anything to add to it because I think you just summed it up so perfectly there.
As did you. That little capper was perfect. Love yourself first.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Rory didn't. That's the kind of, sorry, I know we're wrapping this up, but I got to backtrack a little bit.
Go ahead.
Rory, I think we kind of touched on this in the Lorelai and Rory episode, where she absorbed a lot of her mom. I don't know that she was her own person yet.
Yep.
I don't know if she's her own person now because she still just has so much of this other stuff going on. Dean even calls her out on it, and damn Donna Reed, you know, you only feel that way because your mother feels that way. And I think it's emblematic of Rory not taking the time to necessarily reflect all the time on exactly who she was. And so that made it really hard in her early relationships to truly give herself to another person because she wasn't her own person yet. And she just became a bit of a people pleaser.
Yeah. Don't be like Rory in that way.
Yeah.
Be your own person. Again, love yourself and just surround yourself with people and friends and partners who are going to love you too. And at the end of the day, that'll hopefully be enough and get you to where you want to be.
Yeah. That's the perfect ending. Perfect cap to this episode.
Yeah.
On that note, we're out of here. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Remember to do all the YouTube-y things.
Yeah. Before we depart, let's talk about what we're going to be speaking on next week in case anyone wants to, and hopefully keep coming back and watching us. What's our next topic?
Next week, we're talking about basically the linchpin of the entire concept of the show, motherhood.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many aspects of motherhood to tap into in the show, and it's going to be really hard to keep it to an hour, which is why we're probably going to do multiple episodes on the various sort of subcategories and subtopics within that. But we're going to sort of be looking at it from a higher level next week of like how it's really portrayed in the show and why it's so central, so important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very fun conversation to have because it's, again, the beating heart of the show is that mother-daughter relationship. So we're going to kind of go a little bit deeper on that and also expand on what we've talked about in the past. So if you've missed those episodes about, you know, the special relationship between Rory and Lorelai, go back and watch that because it'll be sort of a precursor, I think, to this one.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Just go back and watch some of our old videos. If you're ever starved for Gilmore Girls content, we appreciate it. And as always, just do the YouTube things. If you've liked this video, just hit that thumbs up button. It's one click. It'll only take you a second. Subscribe to our channel if you want to keep up to date with what we have going on. And if you want to follow us on social media, we have links to those accounts in the description below, so you can follow us there. But we'll end there. And I just want to reiterate again, just if you're watching this, love yourself first and foremost, and go about your days just learning to love the person that you are, and let that be the biggest takeaway that you can garner from what we've talked about this week. And until we meet again, which is hopefully next Friday, spend the week just doing you and loving who you are. And we'll see you next Friday night for dinner. Bye.
Bye.